Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing how far and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the year 1847, in a sprawling cotton plantation just outside Charleston, South Carolina, a series of events began to unfold that would remain buried in county records for over a century. The Harrington estate, with its white columns and sweeping oak trees, stood as a testament to Southern prosperity, but behind its manicured facade, a psychological drama was brewing that would eventually consume everyone involved. The first peculiar detail was noted by Reverend Thomas Whitfield in a parish record dated April 23rd. Young Master Harrington absent from Sunday service for 6th week. Father claims illness, yet physician Dowell reports no calls to the estate. The Harrington family had been fixtures in Charleston society since before the Revolution. Ebenezer Harrington, a successful merchant who had expanded into plantation ownership, was known for his shrewd business acumen and impressive collection of rare books. His wife, Elizabeth, had died during the birth of their second child, a daughter who herself did not survive beyond 2 days. This left only son William as heir to the Harrington fortune. The community regarded William as a serious young man, educated in the North, and returned with progressive ideas that he wisely kept muted in public settings. According to ledgers from 1846, Ebenezer had acquired several new workers for his household, including a young woman named Adeline, purchased from a failing plantation in Virginia. County records describe the Harrington home as a 3-story federal-style mansion set back from the Cooper River, with formal gardens and a separate kitchen house. The main house contained 14 rooms, including a library that visitors often remarked upon for its extensive collection. The quarters for enslaved workers were positioned beyond the gardens, hidden from the main house by a grove of magnolia trees. The sounds of the plantation were typical: horses in the stables, workers in the fields, and the distant bells from St. Michael's Church marking the hours. Yet neighbors would later tell investigators that by early spring of 1847, an unusual tension seemed to hang over the property. The first indication that something was amiss came from Ebenezer himself. Entries in his business journal show increasing irritation with his son's behavior. William, again absent from dinner, claims reading in his chambers, though books remain untouched on library shelves. Another entry, dated May 5th. Son requested private audience regarding estate management. Suggests preposterous changes to household arrangements. Education has filled his head with impractical notions. Must consider stronger measures. William Harrington was 23 years old that spring, having returned from his studies at Harvard the previous year. His father's expectations were clear: learn the family business, prepare to take over the plantation, and make an advantageous marriage to one of the daughters from allied families. The Charleston Courier Society pages mentioned him regularly at first, attending balls and dinners with the Pinckneys, the Rutledges, and other prominent families. By March, however, his name had disappeared from such accounts. Martha Pinckney, whose diary has been preserved in the Charleston Historical Society, wrote, "Young Mr. Harrington declined invitation again, 3rd time this month. Mother says old Mr. H. appears concerned, though says nothing of substance when questioned." The household staff noticed changes as well. According to later testimony from James Green, who managed the stables, young William had taken to long rides alone in the early mornings, returning with his horse lathered as if from hard riding, though claiming merely to have visited the far fields. The cook, a woman named Esther, who had been with the family since before William was born, reported to the housekeeper that the young master had been seen several times entering the kitchen house after dark, requesting meals at odd hours. She noted particularly that he asked specifically for Adeline to bring them to his quarters. Adeline, according to inventory records, was approximately 19 years old. Described as educated, she was purchased to serve as a house servant, primarily attending to guests and assisting with correspondence. The sale document noted her ability to read, an unusual skill that increased her purchase price significantly. Church records indicate she had been baptized on the Virginia plantation, though her parentage was listed simply as unknown. What little is known about her appearance comes from a single notation in Ebenezer's records. New acquisition A. Has refined appearance and manner that will impress visitors. Light complexion suggests house servant background for generations. The early summer of 1847 brought oppressive heat to the South Carolina Lowcountry. The Harrington ledgers show unusually high expenditures for ice, delivered from Charleston to cool the main house. During this period, Ebenezer Harrington's journal entries grow increasingly erratic and concerned. William refuses Rutledge invitation, claims headache, observed him later from library window, walking garden paths after midnight, troubling behavior. And later, discovered personal items missing from deceased wife's trunk, confronted household staff, no admissions, cannot identify culprit. Local physician Dr. Malcolm Dowell was finally called to the Harrington estate on June 12th. His medical ledger contains a cryptic entry, summoned to H plantation, not for young master as expected, but for female house servant. Symptoms suggest nervous exhaustion, prescribed rest, removal from regular duties, Mr. H. Sr. unusually agitated about condition, servant housed in East Wing guest chamber rather than quarters. Unusual arrangement. The summer continued with increasing tension, noted by those peripheral to the household. Delivery men reported raised voices from the study. The postmaster in Charleston noted an increase in correspondence to northern cities, all in William's hand. A tutor brought in to instruct the children of a neighboring plantation observed William and Adeline in what he described as an intense conversation near the garden wall, breaking apart quickly when they realized they were being observed. The situation escalated dramatically in July. Church records show Ebenezer Harrington meeting privately with Reverend Whitfield on 3 consecutive Wednesdays. The content of these meetings was never recorded, but immediate afterward, Ebenezer contacted a slave trader in Charleston. Documentation shows his intention to sell Adeline, despite having purchased her only months before at considerable expense. The transaction was scheduled for July 28th, with removal to take place immediately. On the evening of July 27th, something happened at the Harrington estate that would never be fully understood by investigators. The household ledger shows a dinner was planned with the Rutledge family, including their eldest daughter Catherine, long considered a suitable match for William. The cook Esther had prepared an elaborate meal, and the dining room was arranged for 8 guests. Yet no one from the Rutledge family ever arrived. According to later statements from James, the stablemaster, a message arrived from the Rutledge plantation around 4 in the afternoon, carried by one of their workers. The message was delivered directly to William, who was inspecting the carriages at that time. Whatever its contents, William was observed reading it, then quietly walking to the main house. He requested a private audience with his father in the study. The housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, reported hearing raised voices from behind the closed door. Though she couldn't distinguish the words, the tone was clearly confrontational. The argument continued for nearly an hour before William emerged, his face pale but composed. He went directly to his chambers and remained there until dinner time. Ebenezer emerged later, instructed that dinner would proceed as planned despite the Rutledge's absence, and retired to the library with a decanter of brandy. The evening meal was attended only by Ebenezer and William. Mrs. Porter described the atmosphere as silent as a tomb, with neither man speaking throughout the courses. Adeline was among those serving, and witnesses noted that Ebenezer watched her movements with unusual intensity, while William kept his eyes fixed on his plate, barely touching his food. After dinner, Ebenezer returned to the library, while William announced his intention to ride into Charleston on business. James prepared his horse, noting that it was unusual to begin such a journey after dark. William departed around 8 in the evening. According to the stablemaster's account, he returned near midnight, stabled his horse himself, and entered the house through a side door rarely used by family members. What happened in the following hours has been pieced together from various accounts. The house was quiet until approximately 2 in the morning, when Mrs. Porter was awakened by what she described as a terrible crash, as if a bookcase had fallen. She rose and lit a lamp, venturing downstairs to investigate. The sound had come from the library. Through the partially open door, she observed Ebenezer Harrington standing beside his desk, gripping the edge as if to steady himself. Before him stood William, his posture rigid, hands clenched at his sides. On the floor lay the contents of Ebenezer's personal safe, which had been mounted behind a painting of his late wife. Among the scattered papers and valuables was a small, leather-bound book that William held open, apparently reading aloud from it, though in a voice too low for Mrs. Porter to discern the words. Whatever he read caused Ebenezer to sink slowly into his chair, his face ashen. The housekeeper, frightened by the intensity of the scene, retreated to her quarters without revealing her presence. The next morning, the plantation awoke to shocking news. Ebenezer Harrington had suffered what Dr. Dowell would later record as a cerebral event of sudden and catastrophic nature. He was found by the housekeeper in the library, still seated in his chair, unresponsive though breathing. The physician was summoned immediately, and upon examination determined that Ebenezer had experienced a severe apoplexy that left him paralyzed on his right side and unable to speak. In the chaos that followed, a second discovery was made. Adeline was missing from the estate. Her few possessions remained in her quarters, but she herself had vanished during the night. William, showing remarkable composure given his father's condition, organized the household staff to search the grounds, but no trace of her was found. The scheduled sale was obviously cancelled due to both the seller's medical incapacity and the absence of the person to be sold. William assumed control of the household and his father's business affairs, an arrangement that would have eventually happened but was accelerated by circumstance. He arranged for his father's care, hiring a nurse from Charleston and converting a downstairs parlor into a sick room. Ebenezer Harrington never recovered his speech or mobility. He lingered for 11 months in this condition, during which time William managed the plantation with unexpected efficiency. Business ledgers show that despite his youth, he navigated the complexities of cotton markets and household management with skill that impressed even his father's most skeptical associates. Yet he made no effort to search for Adeline beyond the initial day, nor did he report her disappearance to authorities. When questioned about this by Reverend Whitfield during a pastoral visit, William reportedly replied that she has likely found her way to family in the north, and changed the subject. In the months that followed, William's behavior drew continued speculation. He declined all social invitations, focusing entirely on business matters and his father's care. He began corresponding regularly with associates in Philadelphia and Boston, letters that local postmaster George Wilson described as thick packets, requiring additional postage. He ordered unusual books through Charleston merchants, titles related to property law in northern states, and steamship schedules to European ports. The most curious development occurred in September, when county records show William registering a deed for a small property on the outskirts of Charleston, purchased in the name of W.H. Trust. The property included a modest house and 2 acres of land. Neighbors reported that while the house appeared occupied, with smoke from the chimney and lamps lit at night, they never clearly saw its residents. By early 1848, rumors circulated through Charleston society about William Harrington's increasingly reclusive behavior. He attended church only sporadically, declined membership in the gentlemen's clubs his father had frequented, and was seen riding alone along the Battery in the early mornings, apparently deep in thought. Catherine Rutledge, once considered his likely future wife, became engaged to a plantation owner from Georgia. The announcement in the Charleston Mercury made a bleak reference to earlier understandings having been amicably dissolved. Ebenezer Harrington died on June 15, 1848, never having spoken another word or left his sick room. The funeral was well attended by business associates and local families, though William himself was described as remote in his grief by those present. The will, executed without contest, left everything to William as expected. Within a month of his father's burial, William began selling portions of the family holdings, beginning with the cotton fields furthest from the main house. In November of 1848, something extraordinary happened. William Harrington announced his intention to travel to Europe for an extended period. He arranged for the plantation to be managed by his father's longtime associate, Richard Dawson, giving him limited power of attorney. The house would be maintained by a skeleton staff, with Mrs. Porter overseeing in his absence. The Charleston Courier published a brief announcement of his departure, noting, "Mr. William Harrington, having settled his late father's affairs, departs next week for an extended tour of the continent. His return date remains undetermined." The article mentioned that he would sail first to Liverpool, then proceed to Switzerland, whose mountain air is recommended for conditions of the spirit and constitution. What the newspaper did not report, but what shipping records later revealed, was that William Harrington booked passage not just for himself, but for a second person, listed in the ship's manifest as Mrs. W. Harrington. No announcement of a marriage had appeared in any local paper, nor had any local minister performed such a ceremony. The mystery deepened when James, the stablemaster, reported that on the night before William's departure, a closed carriage arrived at the Harrington estate after dark. The driver remained with the vehicle, while a female figure, heavily veiled, entered the house through the side door. The carriage departed empty 2 hours later, and the next morning William left for Charleston with 2 large trunks and a smaller valise, taking no servants with him, despite the custom for gentlemen traveling abroad. The Harrington estate remained under management for 5 years. During this time, William maintained sporadic correspondence with Richard Dawson regarding business matters, with letters arriving from various European cities, Geneva, Paris, London, Vienna. These communications, preserved in the Charleston Historical Society, focus exclusively on practical matters, with no personal information beyond formal closings. In 1853, instructions arrived from Zurich with directions to sell the remaining Harrington properties, liquidate all assets, and transfer the funds to a bank in London. These instructions were carried out, and the Harrington name gradually faded from Charleston society. The most intriguing document in this case emerged in 1962, when a historian researching antebellum Charleston discovered a leather-bound journal in the university archives, apparently donated anonymously in the early 1900s. The journal belonged to Elizabeth Harrington, William's mother, and contained entries spanning from her marriage until shortly before her death. While most entries concerned routine matters of household management and social obligations, a series of passages dated approximately a year before her death revealed an extraordinary secret. Elizabeth wrote of discovering papers in her husband's study indicating that years before their marriage, Ebenezer had fathered a child with a woman enslaved on a neighboring plantation. The woman died in childbirth, but the infant girl survived and was raised among the workers there. According to Elizabeth's journal, Ebenezer had kept track of the child from a distance, occasionally inquiring about her welfare through intermediaries. The child, Elizabeth wrote with evident distress, had been named Adeline. The final entry in Elizabeth's journal, written just weeks before her death, expressed her conflict about this discovery. She wrote of her intention to confront Ebenezer after the birth of their second child, and to insist that he acknowledge his first daughter and provide for her future in some way that recognized her parentage. The journal ended abruptly, and whatever confrontation she planned never occurred due to her untimely death. The implications of this discovery cast the events of 1847 in a disturbing new light. The acquisition of Adeline from Virginia appears to have been a fabrication, a cover story to bring Ebenezer's daughter into his household without revealing her true identity. Her refined appearance and light complexion, noted in his records, take on new meaning with this context. Most significantly, the relationship that apparently developed between William and Adeline occurred without either of them knowing they shared a father. The leather-bound book that William discovered in his father's safe that fateful night was almost certainly Elizabeth's journal. The revelation it contained, that the woman William had fallen in love with was his half-sister, precipitated Ebenezer's stroke and set in motion the events that followed. The small property purchased under W.H. Trust was likely a temporary safe haven for Adeline after her disappearance from the main house. The veiled woman who joined William the night before his departure was almost certainly her. What became of William and Adeline after they left America remains largely unknown. Swiss records from 1849 show a William Harrison and wife purchasing a modest villa near Lake Geneva. British banking records indicate regular withdrawals from the Harrington funds through a solicitor in London until 1876, when the account became dormant. No death certificates have been located for either William or Adeline under any known names, nor is there evidence of children. The Harrington mansion stood empty for nearly a decade before being purchased by a family from Philadelphia who knew nothing of its history. It was destroyed in a fire during the Civil War, leaving only the stone foundation and chimney standing. Today, the property is part of a suburban development outside Charleston, with no marker to indicate its significance. The only physical reminder of this tragic story is a small leather journal in a university archive, its pages yellowed with age, containing secrets that destroyed one family and perhaps created another. In 1968, a researcher attempting to trace the fate of William and Adeline discovered a curious entry in the visitor logs of a small art gallery in Geneva. A painting had been donated in 1862 by a reclusive couple known locally as the Americans, who lived in a villa on the lake shore. The painting, still in the gallery's collection, depicts a woman standing beside a garden wall, her face turned slightly away from the viewer. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, is the silhouette of a three-story house with white columns. The painting is simply titled Memory of Home, signed only with the initials A.H. Perhaps some stories are never truly concluded, only transformed. The echoes of the Harrington tragedy continue to resonate across time, a reminder of how secrets can poison generations and how the quest for freedom and love can lead people to abandon everything familiar for the chance at a new beginning. In the quiet galleries of a Swiss museum, a painting watches over visitors who never suspect the American tragedy captured in its brushstrokes, while in Charleston, tour guides lead groups through historic streets, recounting well-known legends, but never mentioning the merchant's son who disappeared across the ocean with his father's greatest secret. In 1968, a researcher attempting to trace the fate of William and Adeline discovered a curious entry in the visitor logs of a small art gallery in Geneva. A painting had been donated in 1862 by a reclusive couple known locally as the Americans, who lived in a villa on the lake shore. The painting, still in the gallery's collection, depicts a woman standing beside a garden wall, her face turned slightly away from the viewer. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, is the silhouette of a three-story house with white columns. The painting is simply titled Memory of Home, signed only with the initials A.H. Perhaps some stories are never truly concluded, only transformed. The echoes of the Harrington tragedy continue to resonate across time, a reminder of how secrets can poison generations and how the quest for freedom and love can lead people to abandon everything familiar for the chance at a new beginning. In the quiet galleries of a Swiss museum, a painting watches over visitors who never suspect the American tragedy captured in its brushstrokes, while in Charleston, tour guides lead groups through historic streets, recounting well-known legends, but never mentioning the merchant's son who disappeared across the ocean with his father's greatest secret. The historian who discovered Elizabeth Harrington's journal, Dr. Margaret Collins of the University of South Carolina, spent nearly 7 years attempting to piece together the complete story. Her research notes, archived at the University Library, reveal a painstaking investigation that led her from Charleston to Philadelphia, London, and finally to Switzerland. What she discovered in Swiss municipal records both clarified and deepened the mystery. According to property records in the Geneva canton, William and Adeline, living under the name Harrison, maintained their villa until 1873. Local tax documents list William's occupation simply as man of independent means, while Adeline is recorded as artist and wife. Church records from a small Protestant congregation near their home show that they were accepted into the community, though they maintained a certain distance, never fully integrating into local society. Their neighbors described them as polite but private, speaking French with American accents, and rarely discussing their life before Switzerland. Dr. Collins uncovered a particularly revealing document in the records of a local physician, Dr. Henry Beaumont, who attended the couple occasionally. His medical notes, written in French, mention that Madame Harrison appeared to be in good health, despite the strain of multiple miscarriages and melancholy that deepens in autumn. More significantly, Dr. Beaumont recorded a conversation with William Harrison during one such visit, noting, "Monsieur explained their childlessness results from a condition that prevents healthy offspring." When pressed for details, he became reticent, saying only that some family circumstances cannot be overcome. I detect a great sorrow beneath his composure. This cryptic note suggests that William and Adeline were aware of their blood relationship and its implications for any children they might conceive. The journal that revealed their shared parentage had apparently provided enough information for them to understand the biological risks of their union, leading to their apparent decision to remain childless despite multiple pregnancies. The Harrisons' life in Switzerland seems to have been comfortable but measured. They traveled occasionally to Paris and Vienna, according to passport records, but always returned to their lakeside villa. Local records show they purchased additional property adjacent to their home in 1866, expanding their gardens and adding a small studio where, according to neighbors' accounts, Adeline painted landscapes and portraits that were occasionally exhibited in local galleries. In 1873, something changed in the Harrisons' circumstances. Property records show the villa being sold to a British banker, and the couple disappears from Swiss records. Banking documents from London show the Harrison account receiving a large deposit that year, presumably from the property sale, followed by the establishment of a new account at a bank in Florence, Italy. Dr. Collins followed this trail to Tuscany, where she found records of an American couple purchasing a small olive farm outside Florence in early 1874. The names on the deed were William and Anna Harrison. The description in the property records matches Adeline, wife of American nationality, approximately 46 years of age, light complexion. The couple seemed to have sought even greater privacy in this rural Italian setting, further removed from the society they had left behind. The most poignant discovery in Dr. Collins' research came from the archives of a small church near the Harrison property in Italy. In 1876, the parish recorded the death of William Harrison, aged 52, from inflammation of the lungs after a winter illness. His wife Anna arranged for his burial in the church cemetery, where his gravestone, weathered but still legible when Dr. Collins visited, bears the simple inscription, "William H., born of one world, found peace in another." What became of Adeline after William's death remains partially obscured. Italian property records show she maintained ownership of the farm for another 11 years, living there alone according to tax documents. Local memory, recorded by Dr. Collins in interviews with elderly residents, described La Vedova Americana, the American widow, as a quiet woman who painted and tended her olive trees, occasionally selling small landscapes to visitors from Florence. In 1887, the property was sold to an Italian family, and Anna Harrison vanishes from official records. However, Dr. Collins discovered a tantalizing detail in the archives of a women's boarding house in Rome. A register entry from November 1887 lists an A. Harrison, American widow, age approximately 60, taking up residence. The boarding house catered to genteel women of modest means, particularly artists and writers, seeking affordable accommodations in the city. From there, the trail grows cold. No death certificate for Anna or Adeline Harrison has been found in Roman records. The boarding house's documentation ends in 1893, when the establishment closed. A final intriguing possibility emerged from passenger manifests of ships sailing from Naples to New York in 1890. A Mrs. A. Harrison is listed among the second-class passengers, her age given as 62, her previous residence as Italy. Whether this was Adeline returning to America after more than 40 years of exile remains unconfirmed. Dr. Collins' research notes conclude with a reflection on the limitations of historical investigation. Some lives deliberately step away from documentation, seeking the freedom that comes with semi-anonymity. The Harrisons, or the Harringtons, as they were born, seem to have chosen this path, leaving just enough traces to confirm their existence, but insufficient evidence to fully illuminate their inner lives. Perhaps this was their final act of self-determination, to control not only how they lived, but how they would be remembered or forgotten. The mystery might have remained in academic obscurity had it not been for an unusual discovery in 1965. During the renovation of an old brownstone in Boston's Back Bay, workers discovered a hidden compartment in the attic wall containing a tin box. Inside were several items, a small leather-bound book with blank pages, except for the inscription, "To A from W. Remember only what brings peace," a pressed magnolia flower, a daguerreotype of a young man in formal attire, presumably William, and most significantly, several letters. The letters, dated 1891 through 1894, were addressed to "My dearest friend" and signed simply A. They were written from a boarding house in Boston's South End to someone identified only as M, apparently a woman who had befriended the writer. The contents suggest an elderly woman reflecting on her extraordinary life while maintaining careful discretion about specific details. In one letter dated February 1892, she writes, "You ask why I returned to America after so many years abroad. Perhaps it was a desire to complete the circle, to end where I began, though not in the same place or circumstance. The South holds no appeal. Too many ghosts walk those gardens. But here, where winter grips the city in ice, I find a strange comfort. No one looks twice at an elderly widow who keeps to herself, and that anonymity is its own kind of freedom." Another letter from December that same year offers the most direct reference to her past. "M, your curiosity about my life before Europe is natural, but cannot be satisfied. Some stories cannot be told, even after all principles have passed from this world. What you perceive as romance was also tragedy, and what seemed like escape was also exile. Know only that I loved completely a man who sacrificed everything worldly for my sake, and I for his. Whatever judgment might fall upon us, we answered to our own hearts first, and found that sufficient. The final letter in the collection, dated April 1894, takes on the tone of a farewell. My health fails with the melting snow. The doctor makes reassuring sounds, but his eyes tell a different story. I am not afraid. I have lived a life so far beyond what was intended for me that each day has been an unexpected gift. The paintings I have given you are my legacy, not for their modest artistic merit, but for the memories they contain. The garden wall, the lake at sunset, the olive grove in morning light, each holds a chapter of a story I could never write in words. No record exists of Adeline's death in Boston City records under the name Harrison, suggesting she may have adopted yet another identity in her final years, or perhaps passed away elsewhere. The brownstone where the letters were discovered had changed ownership numerous times since the 1890s, making it impossible to identify M or determine how the letters came to be hidden in the wall. The Harrington-Harrison story might have remained largely unknown had Dr. Collins not published a small monograph on her findings in 1969, titled Across Boundaries: The Exile of William and Adeline. The limited academic publication caught the attention of a novelist researching antebellum Charleston, who adapted elements of the story into a historical novel published in 1972. Though fictionalized and romanticized, the novel brought attention to the original research, leading to a renewed interest in the actual historical figures. In 1978, a descendant of Richard Dawson, who had managed the Harrington plantation during William's absence, discovered additional correspondence in a family archive. These letters, exchanged between Dawson and William during the early years in Switzerland, revealed that Dawson had been aware of the true nature of William and Adeline's relationship and had helped facilitate their escape from Charleston. His assistance had been motivated by a deathbed promise to Elizabeth Harrington, who had apparently entrusted him with her journal and asked him to help her children should the truth ever come to light. The most haunting artifact associated with this story remains the painting in the Geneva Gallery. Art historians who have examined it note that while the technique is that of a talented amateur rather than a trained artist, the emotional quality of the work is remarkable. The woman's posture, facing away from the plantation house while still acknowledging its presence, captures the fundamental tension of Adeline's existence. She is simultaneously connected to and alienated from her birthplace, bound to it by blood, yet excluded from its privileges. Visitors to the gallery who know nothing of the painting's origins often comment on its melancholy atmosphere, the sense of something precious and painful captured in oil and canvas. The story it tells without words is one of impossible choices, of identities constructed and abandoned, of the price paid for autonomy and love. In that sense, Memory of Home serves as both art and artifact, a visual testimony to lives that official history would have erased entirely. What remains unclear, and perhaps unknowable, is when William and Adeline discovered the nature of their relationship. Did they learn they were half-siblings before or after their feelings for each other developed? Did that knowledge cause them to resist their attraction initially, only to succumb later? Or did they make peace with their unusual circumstances, reasoning that a society that had already denied Adeline's humanity had no moral authority over their hearts? The journal entries, letters, and documents provide no definitive answer to these questions. What they do reveal is that whatever moral calculations the couple made, they committed to their decision completely, abandoning wealth, status, and homeland rather than separating. Their chosen exile speaks to both the power of their bond and the impossibility of maintaining it within the social framework of 19th century America. The story of William and Adeline exists in the liminal spaces of historical record, emerging in fragments from ships' manifests, property deeds, medical notes, and personal correspondence. It challenges conventional narratives about antebellum plantation life, suggesting complexities and connections that official histories often obscured. Most significantly, it demonstrates how individual lives could defy the rigid categories imposed by society, seeking personal truth at enormous cost. In 1982, a final discovery added a coda to their story. A small museum in Boston acquired a collection of paintings from a private estate, including several attributed to A.H. One canvas, smaller than the others and apparently unfinished, depicts two figures walking away from the viewer along a tree-lined path. Their faces are not visible, but their posture, an older man leaning slightly on a woman's arm as they walk, suggests both intimacy and interdependence. The background shows mountains that art historians have identified as resembling the landscape near Florence. The painting bears no title on its frame, but on the back, written in faded pencil, are three words: "The Path Chosen." The Harrington story faded again from public awareness by the 1990s, remembered primarily by academic specialists in antebellum history. Yet it continues to surface occasionally in unexpected contexts: a footnote in studies of plantation households, a reference point in examinations of racial identity in the American South, a case study in research methodology courses demonstrating how fragmentary evidence can be assembled into historical narrative. Perhaps the most fitting memorial to William and Adeline came in 2005, when the University of South Carolina established a digital archive dedicated to alternative family structures in antebellum America. The Harrington-Harrison documents formed the centerpiece of this collection, with Elizabeth's journal, William's business correspondence, and images of Adeline's paintings made available to researchers worldwide. The archive's introduction acknowledges that while their story is exceptional, it points to broader truths about how individuals navigated, resisted, and sometimes transcended the rigid social boundaries of their time. In the quiet reading rooms of archives from Charleston to Geneva, in the digital databases of universities, and in the memories of those who have encountered their story, William and Adeline continue to exist, not as historical curiosities or romantic legends, but as human beings who made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. Their story reminds us that beneath the broad strokes of historical movements and social systems, individual lives unfold with complexity, contradiction, and courage that records can only partially capture. The sound of their footsteps along Swiss lake shores and Tuscan olive groves has long since faded. The hands that wrote those letters and painted those canvases have returned to dust. Yet something essential remains: the testimony of lives determined to define themselves rather than be defined by others, to find connection across boundaries designed to separate, and to create meaning in a world that denied their right to exist as equals. In that testimony lies both their tragedy and their triumph.